That's a great question because I do occasionally tap my kids as kind of a focus group of 1 to 2. Hey, would this be a thing that you would want to read? Or hey, are you curious about this kind of topic of horses or music? Or what are you interested about when it comes to horses and music? My youngest daughter is very aware that there are careers that can be done around horses. They've been a really strong inspiration. They're a focus group of 2, so editorial comes in and helps me keep that in check so that we don't go overboard and we're like, we're going to spend 6 pages on this topic because my kids are really interested in it. Editorial's like, maybe 4 pages. Hi, I'm Trevor Mueller. I'm the writer of Bat Pat and Secret S.T.E.A.M Society Horses and Secret S.T.E.A.M Society Music. You can find me at trevoramueller.com or at Trevor A. Mueller on any social media website. And you're watching and listening to Two Geeks Talking.
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Two Geeks Talking is an entertainment industry interview show where we interview the creative people from the comic, film, TV, movie, and video game industries. And of course, I'm your host, Kurt Sasso. We are joined today by the longest running returning guest on Two Geeks Talking. From way back in 2008 to now currently, this is his official 13th time back on the show. He is, of course, the writer of many works in the past, but today we're talking about Secret S.T.E.A.M Society Music, Secret S.T.E.A.M Society Horses, and, of course, Bat Pack, joined by the ever-talented Trevor Mueller. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, and am feeling that lucky number 13 on the show. But thank you so much for being such a strong collaborative partner when it comes to helping to promote the work. I always think that the synergy between, the podcasters, the interviewers, the review websites, all of them, and then the creators and stuff is such an important relationship. And I really appreciate you being such an advocate for the industry, for entertainment, for creators. So Kurt, thank you so much.
Well, I wouldn't have kept doing the show for over 18 years if I didn't have you on at least once a year for those 18 years. So it kind of works out well for me. But you're always an easy person to speak with. You're always so versatile when it comes to your writing style, whether it's in comics or prose. And we're diving back into the young adult audience this time around. I met you, and this is a bit of a recap. I met you back in 2012 at C2E2, the very first C2E2 in Chicago, when you were doing Albert the Alien. And that was our very first conversation from a face-to-face standpoint. You've had a long history. Talk to us about this newest journey for what you're doing with these amazing 3 books and more.
Yeah, well, and more to come, because this is only what has been announced, and they just announced Bat Pat Volume 2, which is coming out later this year as well. So unlike our previous conversations where like Albert the Alien had an online presence with Mark Waid's Thrillbent website, but I was self-publishing the physical books, these books are actually coming out from publisher Paper Cuts. Paper Cuts, for people who don't know, is the young readers line for Mad Cave, who also have Maverick and Nakama Press. And so this is kind of my return to young readers storytelling, which is really, really fun. Secret S.T.E.A.M Society is a brand new line that Mad Cave is launching. It is a bit like Magic School Bus in that it is part adventure story for kids, part educational graphic novel for kids, focused on a particular topic. In this case, I wrote horses, and I also wrote music. And then Bat Pat is an adaptation of a young readers series from Italy. It was also an animated series as well. I do think it's streaming on Amazon Prime or YouTube or something like that. But we got the chance to turn it into a graphic novel. And so that's been really, really fun. And I'm happy to talk about both of these series at length. But again, this is kind of my return to form and an opportunity to work with a brilliant publisher like Paper Cuts, who have just been phenomenal partners in allowing me the chance to play with these characters. So I'm really excited about these books.
Well, how did that conversation come about? Because, like you said, you've been self-published. Now you're with a publisher here currently. Did they approach you? Did you say pitch yourself as per usual? Like, how does one do such an amazing feat?
Thankfully, this came down to who I knew in the industry and what they knew about me. Because of my background with Albert the Alien, because we did 4 multi-award nominated graphic novels for that series, this editor was very familiar with that work. And so he had posted up on social media that he was looking for young readers, writers, to pitch him some ideas or to be involved with some projects that he was working on. And at the time, he was juggling multitudes of projects, not just these two. And I, of course, raised my hand, volunteered, and said, hey, I like to do young reader stuff. Why don't we have a conversation? Tell me what you're looking for. And so he told me about a couple of different projects we were going back and forth on, but he was very, very excited about launching this S.T.E.A.M book, where he's like, I want to do these educational graphic novels. I want them to be more adventure than a lot of the other educational graphic novels that have come out, but still have that quality educational content that teachers, librarians, parents can use. And kids can learn something from these books, but without sacrificing the adventure. He doesn't want it to just be lecture. And because I was the first writer that jumped on board, I kind of got my pick a little bit of what we wanted to work on. He was like, what's your favorite animal? Well, I don't have a favorite animal, but my youngest kid loves horses. And so I was like, I would really like to learn more about horses while we're doing this book. And so he and I kind of got to set the stage, the tone, the pacing for what these books would be, because we were like, well, how much adventure, how much story do we get to put into 120 pages versus educational content? Is this going to be like the Reading with Pictures graphic novels that I worked on, where we're going to have a story editor as well as like somebody who's an expert within the topic that we are writing about, and we get notes from both? Because I'm not an expert on horses. I just have a library card and access to Google, right? Like, and I can figure out how to take those pieces of information and turn those into an adventure. So when they're learning about the inside of a horse, the anatomy of a horse, they shrink down and they go inside in this shrinking ship. And my editor and I went back and forth several times where we're like, well, how do they get small? And there's this alien character in the series called Toot. And Toot has alien technology that allows them to do fantastic things. And I'm like, cool, does he just have a shrinking ray? Do they have a device on their, what they call action suits, that allows them to shrink? Does he have some kind of ship or something that he needs to navigate around in order to allow them to shrink down and to go inside of little nooks and crannies so they can learn about these things? So we got to build a lot of those components together within the first book and the second book, which was music, and that was a lot of fun to do. And even though I don't own these characters, I have no stake in the game for what they like, the world and the ongoing story and the arcs and all those components. Like I got to step in with him early on and help to kind of set the tone and the pace for that series, and that was really, really fun to do. With Bat-Pat, it was a little bit more of a straight adaptation, right? Like they were like, we want to take these 12-minute episodes and we want to transform them into 18-page stories. And we'll collect 3 or 4 of those stories in a book, and we will call that a collection in a graphic novel. And Bat-Pat is just ridiculously cute. It is a really cute story. I'll give you the pitch as I see it, because this is not how it was sold into me. But Bat-Pat is very similar to Scooby-Doo in that it's about a group of kids and a talking animal, in this case a bat, who solve supernatural related mysteries. The difference is that in this series, the monsters are real, but they're not scary. They need our help with something and they don't know how to ask for it. And so I thought that concept was really, really cute and really, really fun. It helps kids to not take things at face value, right, to not judge a book by their cover, and to also focus on and work on their problem-solving skills, and to recognize signals when somebody, like one of their friends or a parent or a peer, needs help with a thing, but isn't outright saying, hey, I need help with this thing, right? And I thought that those were important skills to develop. It was something that I hadn't put into any young readers' books that I had done to date. So to me, there was a fun through line there and a new challenge in adopting this for American audiences and American readers, and for kids who like a fun, spooky mystery with a lot of slapstick and a lot of silly in there, but with a fun, heartwarming message.
When you think back to the books and comics that really grabbed you as a kid, you know, what do you notice now about them that shows up in Secret S.T.E.A.M or in Backpack?
I think the the through line that I've noticed from a lot of comics when I was younger, and cartoon series, I think too,
Mm-hmm.
and these stories, is that it's very empowering for the younger characters and the younger readers. They can see themselves in these characters, and the characters are going on fun adventures. They have agency within their own story, and they have responsibilities and consequences without sacrificing the fun. I feel like too many writers who come into young readers' work without a background in it or without kids or something like that can sometimes fall into the pattern of talking down to their readers. And my intention is never to do that. It's always to have fun, bring them along with the on the adventure, and to ensure that the characters that are represented within the story are empowered and are trying to think of the exact word to kind of phrase, right? But they're empowered characters, and they have the ability to make decisions within the story. They're not just relying on the adults. And I see this sometimes. Avatar: The Last Airbender, right? Like if you take that animated series as an example, because I just introduced my kids to it and they're obsessed,
Nice.
versus the live action version of it, which was more so for adults. In the animated series, which is geared towards that younger audience, they are very much making all the decisions in that story, where they go, what they do. The adults are relying on them in missions, or are relying on them to come up with mission parameters for them to rescue somebody or to break into a place or to stop the bad guys. They have the responsibility and the agency, and audiences can gravitate towards and recognize that, and project themselves into those characters. But in the live action version, they are more so order takers. Like the adults are telling them what to do more so, and their agency is taken away a bit. And you can see this distinction between who is this audience intended for, and how do they connect to these characters because of the role that they are asked to play within the story: leaders or soldiers, right? Followers, order takers. Within our stories here, nobody's telling these characters what to do. In fact, we have a couple of instances where some of the characters, I'll put this in quotes, but go rogue, right? Like within the horses story, the Toot character gets really, really excited about learning about horses, and it's like, hey, can we go back in time and just see how horses started and evolved? And the teacher's like, yes, but. And Toot's like, great, thanks, bye. And they zip off back in time. And the teacher, is like, wait, I didn't finish, right? And so now the kids are like back in time on this adventure, and they're learning about evolution, and they're learning about the various stages that horses went through over the billions of years that they've been around. And the teacher suddenly is like in a panic, because he's like, my students are lost in time, like, and he's trying to go back and find them. And so we have these funny little anecdotes every now and then within the story of this teacher panicking, or the kids popping back up. He's like, there you are, I've been looking for you before you go. And they're like, great, we just wanted to check in, cool, later. And they like disappear again and go on the next adventure. And so like we have this fun through line on there where, again, the kids aren't in danger. The kids are having a fun time, but the teacher's trying to be responsible and trying to do what teachers do and look out for their students. And we present it in a way that's fun and funny and accessible to those younger readers, where they get it, but they also kind of chuckle, and hopefully the adults can chuckle too when they're reading it. So it's that kind of approach that I think is really, really important when you're writing to young readers, is keeping it light, keeping it funny, keeping it entertaining, but making sure too that those young characters in the story, who the readers are going to associate with, have agency, have responsibility, are the heroes at the end of the day, because the story is about them. It's not about the adults.
It also allows them to start thinking from a critical standpoint in terms of like understanding problems and how to solve solutions. And I think that's needed more than ever, since their generation is growing up with technology faster than when we grew up with it. So it's great to see that there's guidance and boundaries and wonderment in comics, especially with S.T.E.A.M Society and with Backpack here. So I think that's amazing to see with with everything that you created, and whoever else takes on the mantle in the coming years with this particular series, I think is incredible. You have so many topics to work from.
Yeah, they have a lot of top tier talented people working on these books. They have announced one additional book so far in addition to Horses and Music, which I think is about space.
Oh.
And my artist from Bat Bill Walko, actually worked on the space book. So I don't know a ton about the space book. I've not seen it. I've not been in it, but my editor has been able, like, whenever we're talking about a particular topic that deals with space within my books, he's always keen to point out, hold on, we're going to tackle that topic in this other book, so you don't need to go into that much detail, or you don't need to focus on that particular topic, which is exactly what I need, because I don't have visibility into what's going into those other books.
Right.
And I don't particularly need it. Like, that's one of the roles that the editor can play. And that also allows me to then sit there and readjust my focus and my pacing on the other topics that are indeed in the stories. And so Horses and Music, if I wrote these 2 years ago, so forgive me, I don't believe that they have anything with space in there at the moment, but there are some other ones that are not announced yet that I've been working on that will have some space elements to them.
Now that you're a dad, when you sit down to write Secret S.T.E.A.M Society, what problem for young readers and the adults in their lives are you actually trying to solve beyond this would be a cool story?
Two things. First is to keep them entertained, and second is to inform them about a thing. And so we, with an animal related book, right, we have a number of different topics that the editor and I talked about wanting to include in there. And it also has to apply to the rules of STEAM education. So science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And we've got to check boxes on all of those particular topics. So with horses, for example, we were like, well, how does math fit in? And then I was like, what about horsepower? Because horsepower is a mathematical equation. And the origins of how horsepower came to be and why horsepower exists and why we refer to it as horsepower even today. And so, like, that origin is in there in like 2 to 3 pages, and we talk a little bit about the math of it. There are environmental factors that we need to consider when it comes to any kind of animal book. Horses poop, horses fart, horses produce methane. Do they produce as much methane as cows? How do those two things compare to each other? And then horses are also used in the production of manure for farming. And I did not know this before I started researching it, but apparently you can buy very upscale premium horse tea. It's manure tea. And it is used for like gardening and plants and all this stuff. And I did not even know that existed prior to starting to work on this book. So we have a couple of boxes that they're not something that we have to check like every single story that we work on, but because it's about an animal, because there's a nature component to it, like, we're typically going to start to check some of those boxes. And as such, we need to have an academic come in and help us make sure that what we're putting in there is authentic and up to date and real, because I do maintain a very detailed bibliography for each of these stories. So that we can always go back and reference, like, well, where was this information come from? Does the academic agree, disagree? Would they change the fact? And then how do we go back and kind of validate what they're saying too? Like, are there additional books and things that we can include in there that help to validate that fact? So we do go through a very rigorous checks and balances process from both the educational component of the story to make sure that what's in there is truthful, factual, and as up to date as we can possibly be. And then the editor and I are focusing on kind of the fun adventure story part of it, where it's, hold on, that's too much lecture. Let's get them into that instead of just having them talk about that, right? Show, don't tell. Yeah. And that's been a very fun thing to try to unpack, is how do we show, not tell, when we're talking about evolution, when we're talking about anatomy, when we're talking about the parts of a hoof and how a hoof works and how a horse knows what ground it's standing on. Is it even? Is it uneven? All those pieces. Care and maintenance and the evolution of all of the riding equipment that are on there with horses. And with music too, like how music has evolved over time, how music used to be this thing that was done kind of tribally and socially and how that's evolved over time to then become something that was more premium for people who could afford to have private concerts within their home and invite all their friends. And then it got opened up to the public, and how the different genres of music have evolved, and the recording equipment involved in music, and all the jobs that you can get within music. Because it doesn't just have to be music as playing an instrument, but the managers, the agents, the booking places, the transportation, the the marketing and advertising, the venue managers. We're trying to, I think, inspire the readers to understand, not only is this a topic that exists, not only is this a thing that you can listen to and enjoy, but there's a potential job here that can be had. And it may not necessarily be the one that you first think of when it comes to this particular topic. So we're trying to be as diverse as possible when it comes to the availability of topics within these particular subject matters, within horses, within music. And we're trying to make sure that within those topics, again, we keep that fun adventure going, and yet still check that box of being informative and educational. That was a very long-winded answer to your short question.
I'd rather have more information than less, especially when it comes to what you're trying to portray with from the educational side of these particular comics. And now that kids are looking at this particular series, whether it's music or horses or whatever else is coming down the pipe here, what have you learned about how kids and families actually engage with the stories versus how we as adults assume they do?
That's a great question, because I do occasionally tap my kids as kind of a focus group of 1 to 2. Hey, would this be a thing that you would want to read? Or, hey, are you curious about this kind of topic of horses or music? Or what are you interested about when it comes to horses and music? And sometimes it's just them, again, with the tangible, because they are kids, and they're like, I want to play an instrument. I want to hold an instrument. I want to play with an instrument, or I want to ride a horse. But my youngest daughter is very aware that there are careers that can be done around horses, horse breeding, horse riding, being a park ranger and working in places where you can ride horses throughout a nature preserve, teaching people how to ride horses for sporting events, the Olympics, jumping, dressage, all the different types of events that are out there. And now she has actually started her own riding lessons with it. So they've been a really strong inspiration when it comes to what topics to make sure are definitely included within the book, and which topics might need a little bit more space within the book versus others, because of where their interests kind of lie. And again, they're a focus group of 2, so editorial comes in and helps me keep that in check, so that we don't go overboard and we're like, we're going to spend 6 pages on this topic because my kids are really interested in it. Editorial's like, maybe 4 pages. Like, so we do have those kinds of conversations, but it's usually pretty free form and free flowing on there. And they have given me so much leeway when it comes to figuring out what to talk about in these books and how to talk about it, and what are the topics that we need to kind of check on here. And it's only very rarely that they'll come back and be like, hold on, this topic seems to be missing from your list, or we need to spend more pages on this topic or less pages on this topic. It's been that's been pretty minimal, which again, I think is hopefully just showing that I'm like, my instincts are right in there, versus, and again, I've got the background in educational graphic novels because Albert started in the Reading with Pictures books, which were doing kind of the same thing, but across a much less focused topical area, because those were graphic novels that had multiple subjects within them and multiple creators contributing short stories to those series. These are much more focused. These are, a set of creators working on one topic across the board. So there's consistency throughout the book, and same look and feel, same characters, same story, which I think also, again, makes it a lot more accessible as well. So another long answer to your short question on there. Yeah, my kids have been a fantastic inspiration for me when it's coming to what topics to kind of include within these books, and then what kind of jokes are we putting in there, or do we need to put in more jokes? I can run jokes past them to see if they are indeed funny. I have found that anything that involves like butts or farts is typically in the win column. So anytime that we can include some kind of humor in there tastefully, right, as best as we possibly can, then we try to do that too, just to keep it light. And then with Bat Pat too, like again, because it's an adaptation, so there's a little less control there, right? Like we have the ability to change certain things, but we don't want to go off the rails because we're trying to take a pre-existing story and turn it into a graphic novel. And that one too, like there's been a couple of instances when we were looking at the episodes and the scripts and things where we're like, that joke doesn't necessarily translate, or there may be a thing where that's just a bit like awkward, or not necessarily a thing that's going to appeal to American young reader audiences, just because of a cultural difference or something like that. And so in those instances, we've been given pretty clear direction to be able to change it where and as we want, or where and as we need. But there's a couple of things too that they'll put into those episodes that are just so random and funny that I'm like, we have to put this in here. Bat Pat kind of exists as slapstick within the Bat Pat story. And so there's an episode where they're being chased by a witch, and Bat Pat's like, well, hold on, witches hate spaghetti, so I'm going to throw spaghetti at her. And they throw this big pot of spaghetti at the witch, and she's covered in spaghetti and meatballs. And Bat Pat's sitting there like eating it, while one of the other kids is like, she doesn't seem to hate spaghetti, Bat Pat. And he's like, oh, that's right, it's water witches don't like, not spaghetti. And I was like, that is so random and so funny and so out there. We're just going to keep that in. Because even though the leap from pasta to water, may not be too far, but it's a bit like there's some dots you got to connect there. We kept it in because it was so random and so weird. Plus, you get to see a witch covered in spaghetti and meatballs, and that's funny. That's a funny visual component to include within the story. So we try to both honor the original source material that's on there, but try to update or change things that may or may not necessarily translate culturally to the audiences.
Does that translate to your kids reading it as well? Like, is there a moment when either like on the page as you're creating something or at home that changed what you think kids can actually handle in terms of either big ideas or fear or complexities?
Not so much on the fears and complexities side, because I think the stories that we were adapting were pretty universal. But when it comes to the jokes, the kids have been a great litmus test to understanding, is this funny as it exists today, or do we need to change it? So if I sit there and I tell them the scene, or I show them the scene, and they sit there and go, I don't get it, then I know that it doesn't land. Like we've got to change it. We've got to fix it. And I've not gotten any kind of pushback on doing any of those types of changes, and they've been few and far between in there. So the idea is just to try to keep it lighthearted and slapsticky and funny, but still with this warm, heartwarming message about acceptance and helping out, extending helping hands to people who don't necessarily know how to ask for that kind of help, and recognizing those signs that are needed for when help may need to happen, even when there's not somebody actively asking for that help. Right. So the kids have been a great way to again judge, is this the right thing to include in here? Is this going over their heads? Does this make sense? And most importantly, is this funny?
Because I was just kind of curious, because you have the litmus test of 2, but do you have feedback from, say, other editors, kids, or anyone that's in that industry that you're working with, have kids that are also like kind of rereading your work to give feedback to? Like, what's that type of focus group like?
Well, not on my end, because I'm under NDA, so I'm not widely sharing these out in advance to do that. But my editor does have kids, and he's got a teaching background, and so he's been around kids for quite some time. And so I feel like we've got a pretty good handle on what some of those jokes are. Plus, he and I are both just devouring graphic novels for kids. I'm reading them with my kids that they're getting from the library, or I'm reading ones that are very popular right now and trying to understand like what makes this popular, what's really good about this story. We're at our library 2 to 3 times a week, and the library director and I have become really good friends. And so whenever they have new books coming out or new books that are making the award circuits and whatnot, she's constantly recommending those books to me and vice versa, where I'm like, hey, have you heard about this title? Because you should also consider hosting this one at the library as well. And so that cross-pollination, I think, is something that in the background is probably helping from an influence perspective to make sure that we're checking the right boxes and telling a story that'll be appealing to the readers without necessarily needing to go out and actively take a poll of children and be like, let's read this scene and tell me how do you feel about it right now, right? Is this scene funny? Does this scene make sense to you? We don't have to be that formal.
Gotcha. What are you reading now then with your kids? Like you said, 2 to 3 times a week at a library. It's wonderful to see that you're using this amazing free exchange of amazing books that people should just go out and read here. What are you reading that kids are enjoying these days that you're even enjoying?
Sure. Well, my eldest daughter just started a 15-book reading challenge at school. So some of them are graphic novels, some of them are picture books, some of them are introductory chapter books that are quite funny, or quite interesting. And so she just read a graphic novel called Bat Cat, not to be confused with Bat Pat, which is essentially about a part bat, part cat hybrid animal that has to go around and collect these 3 tools because their house is being haunted by a ghost and they think the ghost is annoying. And so the story is a little bit about self-discovery, and it's a little bit about acceptance, and it's a little bit about overcoming obstacles with, again, that agency and adventure. And because the main character is anthropomorphic, kids of all ages and all reading levels can kind of identify with the character, which is quite nice. There was another one that we read that was kind of an early chapter novel that I thought was quite funny, and my daughter warmed up to over time, but at the beginning was not as keen on. And I'm trying to remember, it's a character's name, and it's called The Cookie of Doom. And so each of the books in the series are this character's name and then whatever the other thing is. And so the story is essentially about this character getting a fortune cookie that says, live today like it was your last, and thinks that tomorrow is going to be their last day alive. And so suddenly they are trying to go through this series of adventures to live life to its fullest and help other people around them live life to their fullest as well. And I thought that was a really interesting and fun book. And she mostly got scared about it because she's like, well, what if this kid's going to die tomorrow? And I was like, it's a fortune cookie, sweetie. They don't actually tell the future. But it allowed us to, like, it's all the funny adventures that they go on, where he wants to jump this perfect hedge that one of their neighbors is constantly, keeping maintained. It's an award-winning hedge, and one of his missions on his bucket list is, I want to jump over that hedge. And every time he tries, like, either the person who lives in that house is there, or his mean cat is there, or something else. And so something hilarious always ends up happening. He's got a neighbor who lives behind him with a giant tall fence that he can't climb over. So on his side of the yard, they've got a ladder, and on her side, she has a trampoline. But he can't quite jump over it with the trampoline. He's a little scared of it. And so there are moments there where there's comedy because, there's a little bit of the tension and there's a little bit of the concern. And then whatever ends up happening, heaven forbid, he launches himself over the fence or something, like something hilarious happens, and it's funny and cute. And she'd chuckle at those types of moments. But it was interesting just to see how literal she took the setup and the inciting incident for that story, and how emotionally that kind of hit her as, like, this book is a scary book. Like, that was her initial gut instinct. And so that was an interesting takeaway, right? Like, was this audience intended to be 9-year-old girls, or was it intended for a slightly older reader? Was it intended for somebody who's maybe a little less emotionally sensitive than some of my children are? Because my kids got big feelings, and we talk about those feelings all the time. And so she's reading those kinds of stories. She just read one that was about the ocean, the various depths of the ocean. It's like a 100-page picture book that was about the 4 or 5 different zones of the ocean and the types of animals and creatures that live at the various depths of our ocean. And I thought that it was fascinating. And the parts that she got interested in were like at certain depths, there's just what they call ocean snow.
Mhm.
And it's poop, and it's basically animal parts that sharks did not eat higher up in there, and other animals down there are feeding on it. And she's like, they eat poop? And so she's like, those are the things that she gravitates towards when we're reading these types of books. But I can pick up those kinds of nuggets to be like, well, what is she resonating with? What's impacting her? What's causing her to ask questions? What's causing her to feel emotion within these stories? And then how do we potentially imbue those into the types of children's books that I work on as well? So this reading challenge, I think, has given us a really nice, diverse library of books to pull from. And they're all different kinds of books: picture books, chapter books, and comic books as well. With my younger daughter, she's reading a lot of picture books about horses. And when I say reading, I mean more so like looking at the pictures. But she also tends to gravitate towards the familiar. She likes stories that she has grown up with, that we've been reading to her since she was little. And I think that those give her a sense of comfort and familiarity. And so we do tend to read those types of books a lot. And then when we try to introduce her to something new, there's a bit of resistance, but she'll usually give it a couple pages or so before she makes an opinion. And usually she likes it because daddy's reading to her. So, you know, and so what are we reading right now? She really likes Don't Touch This Book, which is a children's book with a purple guy on the cover, and it's a big yellow cover, and it's essentially like an interactive kind of book where he's like, you can't touch this book. Well, maybe just one finger. And then you like pull your finger down the page, and when you turn the page, now there's like a streak of blue on it. And it's like, oh, whoa, you did that with one finger? Well, what happens when you use all five? And then like you do that, and then you turn the page, and now there's like a bunch of different colors on the page. And so she likes those kinds of stories that she gets to interact with a little bit more, and she gets to participate in a bit, versus being a more passive reader and audience to stories. I've noticed those are the kinds of stories that she tends to gravitate towards, is the one where she gets to participate.
Is there any books that you read as a kid that still resonate today to, say, your daughters?
Oh, I don't know about resonating today with my daughters, because we've even been trying to introduce them to movies when I was a kid, and like stuff when I was a kid was not made for kids. Like
That's true.
like but there are a few, like my when my grandma passed, she gave me a bunch of the golden books that she had gotten me as a kid. And some of them tend to be like more on the religious side,
Okay.
or there's like one about like a lost puppy, little Miss Hen. And so some of my kids will sometimes ask for those types of stories as well. And I think they like the fact that there's a universality to some of those stories. Like they are timeless tales. They don't need to be modernized or updated in order to be enjoyable.
Sure.
But at the same time, they'll still ask for Pinkalicious. They'll still ask for things that are much more contemporary as well, that they enjoy. I'm very interested to get my 9-year-old into reading Raina Telgemeier,
Yes.
because my wife and I both adore Raina. I've known
She's
Raina
awesome.
for a number of years. Raina is just an amazing person, and my older daughter has started to read graphic novels that are very similar to Raina's books, but they'll be about like a girl who's joining the track team, or they'll be about a girl who's on like the swim team, or there'll be some Babysitters Club books dealing with things that young girls deal with. And again, have their own agency and adventure and fun stories with them as well. And so I think we're going to start introducing her to the Raina Telgemeier books before too long, because I think she's at the right age for those. And I think Raina's stories are also timeless, engaging, and able to have young readers connect with them on a very primal level. And they're heartwarming. Like they tell a great message. Raina's really sweet, and the way that she tells her stories are really sweet too. So I think we'll probably start introducing those ones before too long. They also like daddy stories. I know my youngest is very excited about horses, even though she hasn't read it yet. But they've read Bat Pat. They've read Albert the Alien. You know, they enjoy those stories too.
it's great that you've had such a large collection, and not even looking at the books behind you there, but your own published works have been a long-standing history of what you created. And when they get older, I'm sure they're going to pick up your other works as well too, and say, "Yeah, my dad wrote this. This is awesome."
What's funny that they're less interested in the fact that I've written stuff. They're more interested in saying, "Wait, Daddy makes comic books. I can make comic books too."
Ah,
And to me, that's the highest compliment,
nice.
right? I mean, you've known me for going on 2 decades now. My whole thing is trying to empower the next generation of storytellers to tell their stories. And when my kids immediately see, hey, Daddy's made multiple graphic novels and comic books, he's in the library, he's in bookstores, I want to do that too. And now they'll go to library events and stuff with me, and they will have like little 4 to 5 page comic books that they've stapled together. They're one of a kind, but it's like the super sisters versus the evil mermaid queen or whatever, and they're little stick figure drawings and whatnot. But that's how I started out. Like it's very fun and very encouraging to see that same process that I recognize I went through happening with my kids right now as well. And if any of the books that I'm working on, either self-published, through paper cuts, through other stories, help inspire kids to tell the stories that they want to tell, I'm all for it.
Obviously, promotion, getting the book out there, people are going to see this, parents, teachers, librarians are going to see this interview hopefully and say, I want to use Secret S.T.E.A.M Society and Backpack with my kids. How would you want them to read or talk about these stories so that when those kids are 25 or 30, something meaningful has stuck with them?
Yeah, well, with it's an excellent question. With these stories, I feel like let's talk S.T.E.A.M Society first. Two things I think are on there. One is the knowledge that they gain about the particular topic that we have in there, and then two is the inspiration for how this topic can potentially be a career for those kids. And if they want to get into music, they can learn marketing, they can learn business, they can learn music and band and singing and all the upfront kind of works, but then they can also learn finance. They can also learn other areas that may not necessarily be as front and center and glamorous, but don't necessarily require you to have that extroverted nature or that talent component on there that not everyone has. I can't sing. I suck at singing. I learned how to play the piano once or twice. I'm terrible at it, and nobody would want to hear me play it. But you know what? I can crunch some numbers for you, and I can tell you how to make business decisions, and I can help, call up venues to book places. Maybe an agent would be in my future versus being somebody who's on the stage performing. And that those roles are also critical and also important to the success of anyone who is in that field. And so my hope is that parents, teachers, librarians can have those kinds of conversations with kids to figure out where do their strengths and interests lie, and how can we encourage them to go in the direction where there is a potential future for them in these topics. Right now, my youngest daughter is obsessed with riding horses. She is aware that you can make money doing stuff with horses, but doesn't necessarily know what all those are. She thinks she's going to be a professional cowgirl when she grows up. But I'm like, you could ride horses in the Olympics. You could train horses or teach people how to ride horses as an instructor. You can be a stable hand or a rancher. You can be a horse breeder. You can be somebody who works in the feed industry and helps to make food for horses that go out there. You can work in transportation to bring that food from the manufacturers to the actual stores where people are buying that feed. There are a lot of different career choices that are available, and they all appeal to people with different passions and backgrounds and strengths. You don't have to be an expert in science to be around horses, or you don't have to be an expert in being a vet or being right, like any of those kinds of things. But through the research, we discovered there are dentists for horses. There are cobblers for horses who make horseshoes. There are metallurgical people who make the horseshoes themselves. There are a lot of different jobs. And so my hope is that long term, those types of conversations can happen and kids can start to figure out where their passions are. And if those passions maintain, start to gravitate towards those fields that will allow them to have a career in an area that they're passionate about long time. In the short term, I hope they buy the books and just enjoy them and laugh and have a good time, and maybe have a conversation with their parents about what they like, what they don't like, which again can hopefully set the foundation for those types of conversations to have down the road.
Because you're diving into these topics of music and horses specifically for Secret S.T.E.A.M Society here, is there an overarching storyline with this? Is it just one stream of consciousness the entire way from start to finish? Is this like a day in the life of Toot? Like, what are we looking at when we open up the book for the first time?
No, that's fantastic question. So there's a cast of characters that Paper Cuts has created that we get to play with. Toot is usually in a lot of the stories because he's an alien. His technology fuels some of the adventures, and sometimes his misunderstanding of Earth culture also helps to kind of imbue the story. But he's also naturally inquisitive and curious. But they probably have a dozen or so characters that are very diverse in terms of background and interests and all those things. So horses, for example, the story of the book is actually about one of the students who has never been around horses before. She doesn't know a lot about them, but the class is going to go to the stables and they're going to learn about horses that day, and she's a little afraid of them because horses are massive creatures and they're very heavy, they're very big, they're a bit unpredictable if you don't know what signs to look for with them, and they can be a bit frightening for kids who have never been around horses before, and she's exactly in that space. And through the act of learning more about horses, her comfort level grows, her confidence grows in it, and the arc that she undergoes within this story is that by the end of the book, she is riding a horse because she now has the ability to do so. She's learned enough about it. And I liked that idea, and my editor really liked that idea of having kind of these self-contained arcs within the stories that, like an animated series, right? Like, she's not changed in a way that's going to fundamentally make a different writer have to approach her a different way within the next adventure they write. But she has come from, I am afraid of horses, to now I am comfortable and confident enough to be able to ride a horse within the adventure. So you get this satisfying conclusion to a story in there that helps to set up the adventure that they go on. Her fear is kind of the inciting incident. And then through the knowledge and education and adventures they go on, she gains confidence. Music is a little bit the same way, where I got approached on this one a bit late in the process, where they had another writer attached to this book. Something fell through there, and they were like, we need you to jump onto this book immediately after you're done with horses. And so I had to come up with something really, really quickly. And I remember back when I was growing up, a lot of my friends were in bands, and they would go and perform at like summer festivals, or they would go perform in people's garages or anything like that. And I was like, well, what if the kids have like a band and they've got a concert that's coming up, but one of them ends up like getting sick and can't perform, and they need to find somebody to fill those shoes, and that person is less knowledgeable about music. And so again, the inciting incident kind of kicks in where they have to fill this hole in there, and they've got somebody on campus who's really, really good at, in this case, it's their lead singer. Their lead singer loses her voice. And they've got this other kid on campus, the one you can see in the lower image down there with his fist up in the air and the microphone in his hand, Sebastian. Sebastian has a really, really good voice, but he's never performed in a band before. He doesn't know anything about bands and music or any of that. He just likes to sing casually. And so they have to tell him about how music started, or how bands work, or how things harmonize and synergize within a stage, and the different instruments that are being played and why they're being played, so that he can learn how to be a part of that band, so that they can participate in this concert at the end of the week. And I thought that that was a fun, again, kind of self-contained story that allows them to go on this adventure to learn a thing. And through the act of learning a thing, they gain important skills and are able to accomplish a task that they have within there. And then Bat Pat is less about education. That one's a little bit more, again, kind of isolated adventures that they have. And each one is a self-contained story that has a monster with a problem. The first adventure in there, for example, is about a witch that's dive bombing people in town. And so everyone naturally just thinks this is a mean witch who's doing bad things. But as the kids investigate and start to learn, they discover that she's not being mean. She's just really bad at flying. And so they need to find a way to help her be better at flying. And so those types of, again, self-contained stories, there's a little bit of an arc, but the characters are fundamentally the same episode to episode or chapter to chapter or book to book, so that editorial doesn't have to keep track of some kind of complex canon or a particular sequence or order in which the books have to get read. I will say with music, I did get to play with the origin of Toot's character, which was detailed out in his bio. I got this bio for all the characters from editorial, and his background is musically inclined. He's called Toot because he's got these little like flute type tentacles on top of his head that can make noises and communicates through music. And so I thought that that was kind of a fun thing to put into here, and editorial was on board with allowing me to show that origin that they had already put together within his bio in 2 to 3 pages of this adventure as well, and showing kind of the universality of music and how music can help bring us together, not just in a literal and reality sense, but in this case in a fictional sense as well. And so I thought that was special that they let me do that and show that origin.
Do you or your kids have a favorite character of the Secret S.T.E.A.M Society or Backpack that they kind of gravitate towards?
My kids naturally love Rebecca, who's the eldest sister of Bat Pat. They think Bat Pat's funny, but they like Rebecca because Rebecca believes that monsters are real. She's the one that's always headstrong and going out onto the adventure and encouraging the adventure to happen. And my kids, I think, very much relate to that. They like that idea. There are 2 other siblings within there. There's Leo, who is kind of the inventor, but he's very lazy. And then there's Martin, who's like the smart kid, and he's the skeptic. He doesn't believe that monsters exist, even though he encounters them in every single episode or every single chapter of the book. He's like, no, this couldn't be a witch. Like, witches aren't real. What are you talking about? And I always chuckle at that. But they very strongly identify with Rebecca. And then within S.T.E.A.M Society, they haven't read those stories yet because they haven't come out yet. But I've got a funny feeling that they're probably going to identify very strongly with Thea, who's one of the girl characters in there, who also likes adventure, and she likes being outdoors, and she likes doing things instead of just like sitting in a classroom to learn. And who's the other one that I wrote recently? I'm blanking on the names. Forgive me. There's like a dozen characters in there that I've got to keep track of. But I noticed that I keep trying to like bring those characters back in stories, and editorial every now and then has to step in and be like, can we use this character instead? Like, that character's been in like 3 books so far and you've written 2 of them. Like, can we this character hasn't been used at all. And there was an instance too with one of the books they haven't announced yet, where there's a character I noticed that nobody had kind of used, and he was like a later addition to their character bios. And I was like, has anyone written a story with this character yet? And they said no. And his background was matching the topic that I really wanted to write about. Nice. And so I pitched them a story idea with that character, and editorial was immediately like, yes, 100% on board, greenlit, we're doing it. And I think that was the 3rd book that I wrote, but it'll probably be the last book that ends up coming out. I can't talk about the topic yet because they haven't announced it yet, but it's interesting to see like the order in which like I work on things versus the order in which things come out, and then the timelines that are involved, because we've been working on some of these for good 2+ years at this point. And so it's exciting that now we finally get to talk about them after having worked on them so hard so long ago.
Is it safe to say that you're chomping at the bit to get Horses released as soon as possible?
Yes, that one comes out in February, and again, I'm very excited for Horses. My daughter's gonna love it. My kids have both asked for copies already. Horses are their favorite animal outside of giraffes, but when I pitched giraffes as a follow-up story, they were like, "No, let's see how Horses does first." And again, I had I had a lot of friends that were involved with music, so when I got the opportunity to work on music too, like, now that my friends are aware that I have written a book about music, they're excited to get their hands on that for their kids as well. So, but yes, I think horses is going to eat up a lot of shelf space in our house over the next few years.
Multiple copies, one for the book bag, one for the desk drawer there for the kids.
If the cover is beat up and the pages are bent and dog-eared, then you know that my kids love it and are reading the crap out of it.
That's the best news for a writer, I'm sure. Those that consume books voraciously. You said February for horses. Is there a release schedule for music, and what about Bat Pat as well?
They have announced the dates. Forgive me, I don't have them memorized. I should probably look those up. But April, I think, is when both music and Bat Pat Volume 2 are coming out. So they'll be out later this year. And then I'm sure they'll be making additional announcements for more books in between now and end of year. Because again, we've been working on a lot of these. And so I think it's just as soon as they can get them off to print and get them back in inventory that they can finally start getting them out there into the public sphere. So I'm excited to see how they do. Again, I'm very touched that I got to be part of a launch of a brand new line of books over at Paper Cuts. And then again, Bat Pat as an adaptation was, I think when the editor approached me about it, he was kind of like, hey, it's an opportunity to do adaptation. And I hadn't done adaptation before, so I like to challenge myself and flex new muscles. But when I saw the story, when I learned about the characters, when I, consumed all of the assets that they gave me to kind of learn about what this was, I was like, this is adorable. There's no way that I would say no to working on Bat Pat.
I love it. That's great. Well, Trevor, I know we could keep talking for hours, and we literally have in the past for sure, but that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. I want to thank you so much for being on the show once more.
Thank you so much for having me, Kurt. I really appreciate it. And again, I hope everyone loves these new books that we've got coming out from Paper Cuts, as well as new stuff that has not yet been announced, but will be soon. And when we do, I'm sure I'll be reaching out to be like, hey, you want me back? Let's talk.
Hey, look, as long as you keep upping the ante on Dirk, it's all good there. But he also is going to be coming back on the show in the later on this year to talk about some of his other works as well too.
And what number will that be for him?
It'll be 12 for him at that point. But
see, we just got to get me on one more time this year, and then we're good.
But for those that want to support you, of course, your work and Paper Cuts and everything like that, where can they find you? How can they support you, and anything else you'd like to promote?
Yeah, at Trevor A. Mueller is me on all the social medias. Find me, follow me, friend me. My website, trevoramueller.com. You can also join my newsletter if you want to at my website on there. You can order Bat Pat and Secret S.T.E.A.M Society horses and Secret S.T.E.A.M Society music through your comic book dealer, your local comic book shop, your bookstores. You can also order them directly from Paper Cuts website, which they occasionally do deals on as well. But yes, please enjoy the books, find them, follow them, support them, and feel free to follow me on social media. I occasionally post things, but not as often as I would like because I'm usually too busy working on these scripts.
Well, like I said, that ends this particular episode of Two Geeks Talking. You can, of course, find this interview and his other 12 plus interviews on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/TGT Media. The podcast, search Two Geeks Talking. That's TWO Geeks Talking, wherever you get your podcasts. And as I say every week, everyone has a story to tell. It's up to me to help bring that out. Thanks for listening, watching on Two Geeks Talking.